Sisters and brothers, good morning. How's everybody doing? You don't sound really sure. How's everybody doing? Thank you. Did you sleep well? It's so nice to see so many smiling faces out there today. Before we begin our talk, I'd like to mention that the experience of rain that we had the day before yesterday is a somewhat new experience for me. I've been living in our monastery in California for quite a while now. I was asking one of our friends yesterday whether those things in the sky are called clouds. We haven't seen them for a while. Before we begin our sharing today, I'd like us to reflect on the rain. When it was raining the other day, I came outside and I was observing the rain falling down, settling on the earth, and the earth being able to receive that moisture, to embrace that moisture, and to allow things to spring forth. When we listen to a talk, when we receive a teaching, it is really important that we allow ourselves to be like the earth, to not be up here above our nose, but to be deep down in the core of our being, to be open, to be receptive. And if we receive one word or one sentence that's helpful for us, then it's been a worthy experience of time together. So before we begin our talk, I'd like to invite everyone to find ourselves in a comfortable position, a position that we feel completely relaxed. We feel completely ourselves. We can gently close our eyes and let us generate our motivation for receiving the teaching. As we breathe in and out, we know that the Dhamma is deep and lovely, that this opportunity to hear it, to see it, to study it, and to practice it comes very rarely. So let us together open ourselves to realize the true meaning. Sisters and brothers, good morning. It's a delight to be together with you today. As I was coming to the meditation hall, I was reflecting on the sparks in my own life that led me towards the spiritual path. And one thing in particular came to me. I know we all have very different stories. We all have very different sparks in our own life, but there might be some commonality with what I'm about to share. I asked myself, whatever drew me to Buddhism? What drew me to Buddhism? And when I asked myself that question, one experience from my childhood comes out very strongly. I was one of those children that were told constantly to wake up to yourself. Was anyone else here told? Yeah, okay. When I recall the teachings that I was given as a child, it was always, you need to wake up to yourself. You should wake up to yourself. Why are you doing that? Wake up. And so I recognize that perhaps Buddhism is the perfect path for me, because Buddhism is all about waking up to ourselves, waking up to our real situation, waking up to the situation of others. It can be said that the whole of Buddhism, or the whole of meditation practice in the Buddhist tradition, circles around waking up to the reality of the functioning of the Four Noble Truths in our daily lives, in our experience. The first of these Noble Truths is recognizing what's really happening within us and around us. And this is, as our sister was sharing last night, one of the miracles of mindfulness. The capacity to recognize what is really taking place, not our idea of what's taking place, or our interpretation of the experience, but what is actually taking place. That's a miracle. Meditation practice, mindfulness practice brings us to life. Helps us to become more and more awake and present to our lived experience. And that is truly a miracle. And when I think about this question of waking up, and waking up to myself or ourselves or yourself, I like to ask myself, what is it that I need to wake up to? What is it that you need to wake up to? This is perhaps one of the most important questions we can ask ourselves and to ask each other. What is it at this moment in time, wherever we've come from, whatever we're doing, that we need to wake up to? What's the journey of discovery that we need to make, individually and collectively? Our own spiritual journey begins in the real sense when we have the capacity and the willingness to ask ourselves that question. This particular formation of experiences, concepts, joys and sufferings that we call ourself, or sometimes that we call you or me, is different from anybody else, everybody else that ever was and ever will be. There's a universal aspect, there's a commonality, but there's also a particular, a way that these different conditions have come together in us. We have our own collection of experiences, of deep joys, of deep suffering, that have come together to bring us to this place. And our awakening journey, our spiritual journey in that sense, although there's a commonality, is unique to us. In the year 2000, I was asked to go with our teacher to England to help to lead a retreat. Actually, it was a series of retreats, and we were in Norwich in England. It's famous for the bells. Although, believe it or not, I didn't hear a single bell while I was there, apart from our own. And we were doing walking meditation in the street. As we were doing walking meditation, there were perhaps about 60 or 70 of us during that day of mindfulness, walking out on the street. As we were walking around in the residential streets in Norwich, a group of teenagers on bicycles came past. And one of them was very brave. He asked a very, very deep question. He skidded his bike to a stop, turned it around, and said, "So what's all this in aid of then?" Now, I thought that was a very deep question. And I think it's also another way of asking the question that I raised earlier. What's all this in aid of then? What's all this about? Why do we even bother? Good question. Very good question. Why did you become a meditation practitioner? Why are you sitting here in this hall right now? And if you've been practicing for a while, it can always be helpful to ask ourselves, why am I still a meditation practitioner? Oh, there's some laughter. It wasn't meant to be funny. Do we need to process? Why am I still a meditation practitioner? What discoveries have I made on my journey? What brought me to this moment? These questions are helpful for us to take ownership of our spiritual path, to take ownership of our journey. The spiritual path is not something that happened only 2,500, 2,600 years ago, but it is alive in each one of us right here and right now. And that is the importance of being willing to ask ourselves these questions. And also to look at our approach to meditation practice, to the spiritual path. One of the stories among the many that are told about the Buddha after he attained enlightenment, which may or may not be apocryphal, but I find it a helpful construct, is that after the Buddha woke up, discovered the Four Noble Truths, while he was sitting under the Bodhi tree, he opened his eyes and said, "Oh, that's strange. I'm not unique. Every single being, without exception, has this capacity to wake up, this unobstructed mind." That's pretty good news, isn't it? Especially if we find ourselves at times feeling discouraged. Or we notice we're telling ourselves things like, "I'm a bad practitioner," or "I'm unmindful." All of us, even you, even me, without exception, the trees, the rocks, the flowers, the animals, the scorpions, we have a lot in Deer Park, have this unobstructed mind, have this seed of goodness that we call Buddha nature. We have the capacity to wake up. And so the approach of meditation practice, particularly in the Buddhist tradition, is from the very get-go somewhat different to the approach that we might be used to in some of our Western traditions. It's a process of uncovering what's been there all along. It's not something that we need to obtain from someone else, from something else, after a whole lot of hard striving, but it's a process of developing the capacity to turn around and see what has been there all along. There are times when we can approach our spiritual life or our meditation practice as a project. And I'm not going to say we're not fixer-uppers, because we are fixer-uppers. There's some things to do, isn't there? A little bit of insulation here, perhaps some ceiling tiles there, maybe a new staircase. However, the core, the framework is there already within us. Taya's told us something that I find to be almost like a double-edged sword. Our teacher has told us we are already what we want to become. We'll go a little bit more deeply into becoming in a few moments. But on the one level, let us say we want to become peaceful, we want to become happy, we want to become free. Our teacher is telling us we are already that which we seek. And the other side of that is we are already what we have wanted to become. In the sense that in Buddhism, we recognize the power to choose how to interpret our experiences. And causes and conditions and the choices we've made, the sufferings that we've had, the joys that we've had have brought us to this moment. So it's humbling also to look in that way. We are what we have wanted to become. We have the power to choose a different way. We have the power to choose how to respond. And it's important always in our meditation practice to recognize that underneath all of these layers of difficulties, of interpretations, of sufferings, that there is this innate goodness in each of us. Otherwise, we can approach the practice with a sense of, I need to fix myself, I need to get rid of this quality in order to obtain something else. Once I get rid of my anger, everything will be perfect. Once I get rid of my depression, once I get rid of my jealousy, everything will be perfect. Sometimes we also think, once I get rid of that person, everything will be perfect. And so we get into a vicious cycle. Because in that sense, our attention is outside. Our attention is outside of that spacious place within ourselves that we do have within us, and each living being has within them. We have our sufferings and difficulties, yes. And we also have this spaciousness that I firmly believe each one of us would not be here if we had not have had a moment where that spacious mind presented itself to us, if even for a moment. And that's a wonderful place to begin. Let's have a sound of the bell. It seems quite easy for most of us, if not all of us, to focus on what's not going right or well or good, whatever word we want to use, within us or within other people. It's more challenging to notice what is going well within us and around us. In fact, it's an evolutionary adaptation. It's a survival adaptation. We were much more likely to survive if we were always aware of things that were uncompleted, undone, or not quite perfect. There was a researcher back in the 40s and 50s called Bluma Zeigarnik from the University of Berlin. And she discovered what she calls the Zeigarnik effect. Many of us are nodding, we know about this. In summary, when we are engaged in a task and we feel that something is uncompleted, then our attention is focused on that. In fact, I believe it's 18 times more likely to focus on what is not perfect, what's wrong, what's difficult in a situation than we are on what's going well. So it requires some training to adjust this perception, this mode of perception that we have. And this is one of the roles of mindfulness. We begin to recognize that what we're seeing is only part of the reality and not the entire reality. Last night, we heard the chant to the Bodhisattva of deep listening. Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara. The longer I practice, the more I feel within myself that one word that is synonymous with mindfulness practice is listening. When we develop the capacity to listen, not only with our ears, but to listen with our whole body, we open a space of presence within ourselves. We open a space of availability for what's taking place. And this is the role of developing this energy that we call mindfulness. Developing the capacity to be there, to be present, to be awake, to be fully ourselves. What does it mean to listen with our whole body? What does it mean to listen to our life? What does it mean to be able to listen to our joy, to be able to listen to our suffering, without judging, without reacting? So for me, at the very beginning of this retreat, I would like to encourage you and invite you to open a listening space. In the Vietnamese language, I discovered something very beautiful. A few of us sisters and brothers were sitting around enjoying some incense, which is something kind of usual in the monastic circles. We were enjoying some incense burning. And I noticed that our sisters and brothers of Vietnamese origin were saying, we listen to the smell of the incense. In Vietnamese language, we don't say, I smell the incense. We say, I hear. And that opened up a whole new way of looking at things for me. Do we listen only with our ears? Or is there another way to open to, another way or another number of ways to open to our experience? Opening an availability, a space of availability to what is. This is one of the first fruits of developing this mindful attention. I'm not the kind of person that has a whole lot of prophetic dreams. Some of us, I hear in Dhamma sharing or around people saying they had amazing dreams of meeting their ancestors and all kinds of things. I'm the kind of person that will dream about going to the market, buying a loaf of bread and coming out with a loaf of bread. That's, that's my kind of dreams. But a number of years ago, I had a dream that impacted me deeply and impacted my practice. I had a dream that I was sitting eating a meal with the Sangha. And as I was sitting there, Tay, our teacher, came up behind me and put his hand on my shoulder. And he said, well, Brother Phap, is it yes or is it no? And in that moment, I put down my chopsticks, turned around and I said, yes. It's yes. And as I practice meditation, as I practice mindfulness, and as I consider mindfulness in terms of opening an availability space, I also see that this retreat and the development of mindfulness is an opportunity for us to practice saying yes. Saying yes to this experience, opening ourselves to what is really taking place. Are we available? Are we open? We've never been more connected in history than we are at this point in time. I mean technologically. We are very rarely off the grid. And yet at the same time, we've never been more disconnected from our lived experience, from our bodies, than we are at this moment in time. I had a young person tell me that if it's not Instagrammed or it's not Facebooked, it didn't happen. Which is somewhat discouraging, isn't it? When I was in Hong Kong, I think it was 3 years ago, we were doing walking meditation with Tay. There were many hundreds of us at the retreat there. And as I was doing walking meditation, I noticed a number of people with smartphones. And they were texting and updating their Facebook status and things like that. And I was thinking, what on earth could they be writing? Are they writing, I'm doing walking meditation with Tay? Because if that's what they're writing, it's not true. You're not there. It's kind of humbling, isn't it? And we're trained from the very time of our birth that in order to be a productive member of our society or our family or even a human being, that we need to learn to multitask. But if you come to some of our practice centers or retreats, you notice something very interesting, that our focus is completely different. Our focus is on monotasking, and we celebrate monotasking. We're not ashamed of monotasking. To really be present for what's in front of us and to not be divided. In Buddhism, it's said that a person is not noble by birth. But when the three parts of our being, our body, speech, and mind are together, really engaged with whatever it is we're doing, whether it is the meal in front of us, whether it's the conversation we're having, the cup of tea, the flower, then we are a noble person. So we're quite proud of monotasking, and even in terms of language, we do our best to reinforce this in each one of us. Walkie-talkies in our monasteries are called stoppy-talkies and things like that. When we walk, let us, during this retreat, simply walk. When we talk, let us simply talk. When we eat, let's be fully present for the food in front of us. Or when we share or listen to another person, let us put aside all other things and be present with that person. In that way, these few days, these very few days that we have together, can be some of the richest and most meaningful days that we've ever had. It would be a shame to have these few days where we can potentially step away from our multitasking lives, the lives that we're very divided, all the responsibilities we have, and yet we don't let go. Whether we're a Dharma teacher, whether we're a new practitioner, let's make the commitment to ourselves and to each other to do everything fully, even something that might seem inconsequential. Let's enjoy the sound of the bell. To return to what we spoke about earlier, there are many ways to approach our spiritual path as a process of uncovery, but there's also another way of approaching our spiritual path with an attitude of lack. I want to get something. I want to become something. That can be a position outside of ourselves. Maybe I want to become, I don't know, a Dharma teacher. I want to become an OI member. I want to become a practitioner. I want to become peaceful. I want to become happy. I want to become enlightened. So I'd like to ask you to maybe close your eyes for a moment and to ask yourself at this moment in time, what is it that you want to become? What word comes to you? It might be a word like peaceful, it might be happy, whatever word comes to you, okay. Usually we stop right there. I hear it very often in Dharma sharing. I want to become happy, I want to become peaceful. These are all great things, fantastic. But if we stop there, that's a pity. When we use a word such as peaceful or happy or liberated, what do we mean by that? What does happy mean to you? What does peaceful mean to you? If we had a discussion where each of us shared what that word meant to us, we might discover many interesting things. I love to tell the story about how my younger brother visited Deer Park Monastery. I think it was in 2010. And he asked the brothers if he could take me to Universal Studios. And I was secretly hoping the brothers would say no. But they said yes. So we went to Universal Studios, and it had been maybe 25 years since I'd been to an amusement park. It's going to be another 25, I'm just saying. But we went to the amusement park, which is an interesting concept in itself, isn't it? But anyway, we went to this amusement park, and it had been so long since I'd been to an amusement park, I didn't know that they took photos at the end of all of the rides. So you see everybody else, in the photos at the end of all the roller coasters and things, you see everybody else, and you see me. My brother has a collection of maybe 12 or 13 photos of me like this. So one person's happiness what is your happiness? What is your peace? What is your liberation? And are you sure that you'd recognize it if it were right there for you? As we develop the capacity to be present, and we'll speak a little bit more about actually applying and developing our mindfulness in a moment, we recognize more and more of this moment. We recognize more and more of what's actually there, the conditions of happiness, the things that we don't notice. Perception can be deception. The Buddha said all of our perceptions are wrong perceptions. Tay's a little bit compassionate. He's 99% of our perceptions are deceptions. I had this brought home to me very strongly in the spring. I love to do walking meditation. I really do. And I had the opportunity in the spring to go to Plum Village and enjoy the springtime there. And one of my delights during that visit was to walk past one of the lotus ponds and to sit there and to just look at and admire these two ducks that were floating on the pond. They were always together. It seemed that they were inseparable. They'd float around the pond, and I would just sit there thinking, isn't nature wonderful? These two have such a deep connection, and I was feeling one with them, and they were feeling one with me. This went on for about 2 months. And then as I was sharing with Phap, one of my elder brothers in Plum Village, he said to me, Phap, they're plastic. True story, that. Where there is perception, there is deception. We laugh at the story because if we're really honest with ourselves, we know this is also our story. And most of our life is not the bare experience, but it's interpretation of experience. We see a flower, and then we say, this is a purple orchid flower, and we have a whole series of preconceived notions about what that might mean. And we shut ourselves off from the experience of the reality, or a different sense of the reality of that flower. The flower here might be our happiness, might be our sadness, might be another person, can sometimes be ourselves. So let us, in this retreat, in line with our monotasking, be willing to look at the stories we tell ourselves about the experiences that we're having. Whenever you tell yourself something in this retreat, this is hot, this is cold, I'm suffering, I'm happy, I'm sad, remember the ducks. Am I sure? What does that mean? What is it that you want to become is the question we've been looking at so far in this talk. Becoming, in the Pali language, is bhava, And the Buddha spoke about this in the very first teaching he gave, the Discourse on Turning the Wheel. Bhava is looked at in terms of suffering. Because bhava, this concept of becoming something, is related to a technical term in Buddhism, but it's a very deep one. It's tanha, it means thirst. Thirst for something that we think is outside of ourselves and that sadly we will never get, will never attain. We'll never quite get to that mirage outside of ourselves. The Buddha invites us to look at this tendency to want to become something fixed, and to turn our attention around and to recognize that that which we're searching for outside of ourselves, that we think somebody else can give us, has been there all along. Mindfulness, as our sister shared last night, is the energy of being aware and awake, and it's a natural quality of our mind. The Buddha said it's reported in the commentary to the Satipatthana Sutta that he said, mindfulness, friends, is as essential to the spiritual life as salt is to the curry. It gives flavor, it gives life. Have you ever eaten something without any salt in it, without any body in it? You notice the difference right away. It brings life. It brings out the qualities that were already there. Qualities within our mind, qualities within our experience. In the Western world, for a number of centuries, we grew up with the idea that mind and body are somehow separate. When we speak about mind, we're speaking about something up here. This is the idea that we grew up with. It's okay, but it's a little bit unfortunate. And yet, instinctively in our bodies, we know this is not the case. If I ask you to close your eyes and point to yourself, about 7/8 of you will point here. Me. You won't say me. You'll point here, to the core of your being. Interestingly, we're told these days that the heart consists of approximately 60% neural cells, so it has a sense of consciousness. In the Indian philosophy of the Buddha's time, the Vedic philosophy of the Buddha's time, don't worry, we're not going to get too technical, the seat of consciousness was not seen to be in the brain, but the seat of consciousness was seen to be the heart. And so we need to remember when we're using words such as mindfulness, that they are translations. And they may not reflect the entirety. That we also need to be willing to look a little bit further. When we're using a word such as mindfulness, it's a translation of the Pali word sati, or in Sanskrit, smrti. And we know in many of the Asian languages, Chinese and Vietnamese, to use two examples. The character for mind, or the word for mind, and the word or character for heart is the same. Dam or xin. You need a second word or a second character to distinguish mind or heart. So just as an exercise, for us in the West, it can be helpful from time to time when we hear the word mindfulness to remind ourselves that mindfulness practice is not only an intellectual exercise that's somehow divorced from our embodiment. But actually, it is rooted in the core of our experience, in the core of our being. It can be also possible to translate sati as heartfulness. And for some of us who are used to approaching things as a project or as a mental conundrum to solve, this can be a helpful medicine. When we were in a Tibetan temple in Australia a few years ago, I learned about seed syllables. A A seed syllable is a syllable that contains power. And when I consider mindfulness, and I think about the Plum Village tradition, the seed syllable of the practice of mindfulness is in the word arriving. It's the syllable ah. Because we put down all of our projects, all of our worries, and we come back to our bodies and we're fully there. Arriving. That's the whole experience of mindfulness. Arriving in our body, arriving with our breath, arriving with our mental formations. Tay has told us again and again, our practice of meditation should be a delight. A few years ago, I was sitting on Tay's deck, and Tay said, "Brother Hawaii, if you're going to sit here, make sure you swing your legs." He wasn't only talking about sitting on the deck, but also in our practice of meditation. Walking in such a way, sitting in such a way, eating in such a way, speaking in such a way that peace and joy are possible right here and right now. Not sometime in the future, 3 or 4 months away, but right here and right now. When we develop the capacity to be present, to be available to what's taking place, our breath, our step, the food in front of us, the person, we develop a quality that we call concentration or samadhi. Concentration in Buddhist meditation is not intellectual concentration that we have when we're studying for an exam. We all know that we feel exhausted after that. But concentration in Buddhism, which is a deepening of mindfulness, is imaged in the Pali language as a traveler who's come a long way, sits down under a shady tree and rests her or his back against the trunk. Concentration is a dwelling with, and it's a deepening of the energy of mindfulness. If we recognize the flower, and we become present for the flower, then over time, if we make that our practice, over time we become one with the object of our attention. It might be a flower, it might be our breath, it might be our step. And our mind's not running here or there or somewhere else anymore, but we're able to rest with that. Just like a person resting their back against a tree, which is a beautiful practice. Try it during this retreat. Simply resting there with our breath, with our step, with each other. And then another quality has the possibility to emerge. That quality is called insight. We see an aspect of something that we haven't seen before. Something reveals itself to us. Mindfulness needs to be established on something. Just like when we build a house or a meditation hall, we need to have a foundation. And in Buddhism, the establishment of mindfulness is the 4 foundations. Form, feelings, the body in the body, the feelings in the feelings, and so on. The Buddha traditionally taught 40 exercises of meditation. If you're interested in what they are, you can look in the Path of Purification, the Visuddhimagga. Some of those exercises are things like focusing on the elements, focusing on loving kindness, compassion, joy, equanimity, focusing on different aspects of our body, focusing on different discs, things like that. It's all very interesting, and many of those exercises are suitable for people of certain mindsets or others. There's one meditation that's suitable for everybody, and that's mindfulness of breathing. Our breath is something that brings us back to our lived experience. Brings us back to our embodiment. And in both the Satipatthana Sutta and the Anapanasati Sutta, we learn a number of exercises of mindful breathing. During this retreat, we're going to be exploring 16 of these exercises of mindful breathing. The first 4 of these exercises are foundational exercises that help us come back to our bodies. Help us come back to the solidity and also the ever-changing nature of our body. We learned some of them this morning. The first exercise is called in and out. Doesn't sound too complicated, does it? In and out. If we're a new meditator or sometimes a seasoned meditator, even though that is one of the very initial practices, it can already be quite challenging. In and out. Simply noticing what's been there all along. This, for me, is perhaps one of the biggest challenges we will have in the life of a meditator. To simply notice and not to try to control. As we breathe in, we notice what is naturally taking place. As we breathe out, we notice what is naturally taking place. And we become one with our breathing. In, out. This exercise we can do while we're sitting, while we're standing, while we're walking, or while we're lying down. Simply noticing. Watch the tendency to try to create something, to make our breath be something that it's not. When we are able to be with our breath, to become one with our breath, then we start to develop a sense of curiosity. I think I'm not the only one with a curious mind. And as we sit there and we're one with our breath, another aspect begins to present itself. And we begin to notice that each breath is not the same. Each breath has its own nature. This breath might be a little bit deeper, longer. This breath might be a little bit slower. Or it might be shorter, or it might be faster. Once we've developed the capacity to be present with our breath, these subtleties present themselves. We notice the nature of our breath. It's important when we experience and we work with the second exercise that we don't try to manufacture an experience. We don't try to make our breath deep or long or short or fast or slow. We simply notice that the breath at this moment in time is long, and at this moment in time it's short. Long and short. Why don't we experience just a moment of mindful breathing? Experiencing the body while inhabiting the body. Experiencing the feelings while experiencing the feelings. Experiencing the mental formations while experiencing and inhabiting the mental formations. Experiencing consciousness while inhabiting consciousness. These are the 4 establishments of mindfulness. And we'll touch those as we go through the next few days. The 3rd exercise of mindful breathing is called experiencing our body. I love that. Isn't it beautiful? Experiencing our body. It's almost like we say, hello, I know you're there. I've forgotten about you for quite a while, but I'm here now. Our breath is the doorway that brings us back to our body. And once we have developed this sensitivity and we begin working with the 3rd exercise, experiencing the body, it consists of a couple of aspects. As our attention begins to deepen and become more sharp. The first aspect is called, in the Pali language, sabakaya. It means being aware of the entire body. You might find it helpful as you breathe in and out to allow your attention to flow through your whole body, being aware of the sensations. Maybe in this moment you notice the sensation of your buttocks on the chair or the cushion, your clothes on your body, the warm or the cool air touching your face, your hands, your feet, your legs. Perhaps you notice a prickling sensation, or you notice the posture of your body. So being aware of the body in its entirety. And our attention naturally becomes more and more refined. And then what happens naturally is we start to bring attention to all the different parts of our body. The Buddha described it as a farmer opens a bag of mixed seeds and picks out the sesame seeds and the black beans and the kidney beans and says, sesame seed, kidney bean, black bean. I'll leave it up to you to decide what part of you is a kidney bean or a sesame seed, that kind of thing. But going through our whole body and recognizing these aspects. You might find it helpful to do a guided meditation, such as going through the 32 parts of your body, the hair of the head, and contemplating that. I don't know about you, but mine's getting grayer and less. The hair of the body, fingernails, toenails, teeth, skin, etc., etc., and bringing my attention to each of those parts. Very beautiful and revelatory practice. Or you might contemplate the 4 elements in your body. Fire, the heat, the air. I'm full of hot air. The water, the earth. Contemplating these different ways that your body comes together, these different elements that come together to form your body. And then the 4th exercise, I think, is a really key one for us at this time and in this place. It's called calming our entire body. As we go through these first 3 exercises, we create the conditions for calm and ease to arise. I noticed that it's very difficult for many of us in our society at this time to simply be. We're sitting and we're fidgeting, or as we shared earlier, we need to update our status, or we need to do something else. It's very difficult to simply sit and to be. We always need to become something or someone else. And there was a very interesting study done that I'm going to close the sharing today, because I really think it has importance for us during this retreat, if not outside of this retreat. I'll read a few excerpts. It was a study done at the University of Virginia 2 years ago. Most people are just not comfortable in their own heads or in their own bodies. According to a new psychological investigation led by the University of Virginia, the investigation found that most people would rather be doing something, possibly even hurting themselves, than doing nothing and sitting alone with their thoughts. So I just like to interrupt this by congratulating all of you for having the willingness to be present for yourself, because it's not the norm. Congratulations. The results are a testament to our discomfort with our own thoughts, say psychologists, and to the challenge we face when we try to rein them in. We lack a comfort just being alone with our thoughts, says Malia Mason, a psychologist at Columbia University in New York. We are constantly looking to the external world for some sort of entertainment. It was this observation that led social psychologist Timothy Wilson at the University of Virginia to embark on the series of 11 studies. Wilson and his colleagues began the first experiment by asking participants to stash mobile phones. I'd like to ask you to do the same thing during this retreat. You'll be okay, I guarantee you. Stash mobile phones and other distractions, and to sit quietly for up to 15 minutes. Half of the 409 initial participants did not enjoy that experience. I'm hoping you enjoyed the sitting meditation this morning. I hope it's the case. 1/3 indicated that they, and it's in inverted commas, cheated. Just how uncomfortable was the experience of sitting and doing nothing? In the second experiment, participants were given a small electric shock that was so unpleasant that 3/4 of them indicated that they would pay money not to experience the shock again. And yet, when they were placed in the room alone with their thoughts, 67% of male participants and 25% of female participants, now don't feel good about yourself or bad about yourself, depending on how you define yourself, were eager to have something, anything to do, that they voluntarily shock themselves. What is striking, the researchers write, is that simply being alone with their thoughts for 15 minutes was so aversive that it drove many of the participants to self-administer an electric shock that they had earlier said that they would pay to avoid. These experiments have been repeated, just in case some of us are thinking, oh, college students. But these experiments have been repeated with participants ranging from ages 18 to 77, and from various backgrounds, including church groups, etc., and essentially the same results have been reported. Professor Wilson notes that broad surveys indicate that by and large, Americans, in case you're wondering, thinking I'm judging, I'm an American, okay? Americans spend their time watching TV, socializing or reading, and actually spent little or no time relaxing or thinking. It's kind of sad and kind of heartening at the same time, this study, isn't it? Our tendency is to want to be doing something. We've got to be doing something. This is our monkey mind at work. And so to be here on retreat, to have this invitation to monotask with our breath, something as absolutely ordinary as our step, as our breath, as the food in front of us, is a revolutionary act. And it requires some training. The capacity is already there within us. It's simply up to us to choose to allow these moments, these days, this experience in front of us to be that relaxing, that deep, that meaningful experience that we're needing, that we're looking for, that moment of rest. I wish you every success in your practice. Have a very happy retreat. Let's enjoy some sounds of the bell. Sisters and brothers, while we massage our legs,